Brothers WISP. The Brothers WISP, Brothers WISP. The Brothers WISP. The Brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's the Brothers.
Hey everybody, this is Tommy with the Brothers WISP. This is going to be episode number 167 or 168. I can't remember off the top of my head, and I didn't make note of it. So that's tomorrow's problem. So today we're going to be talking about internet exchanges, and we've got some old time fans and some really old faces and a new face here to chat with us. So let's go for my left over here. This is John.
Hi, John Osmon, out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I don't know what I'm doing here, but we'll try and make things work well.
Well, I just kind of get the guys who respond and are helpful and probably are intelligent, especially people who are going to be more intelligent than me on this conversation. Next up, we have super old face here, one of the OGs, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm actually in his state nowadays here in Illinois. So
The state of disarray?
That too. The state of insanity and road construction everywhere, all the time. Oh my goodness. And then down here I have Martin Weddle joining us today. Where are you based at, bro?
Indianapolis, Indiana. Crossroads.
Okay. And what do you do to make the world a different place every day?
I manage a 16 hospital healthcare network. I also have a voice team and a network operations center team. So most of the engineers that do a lot of the day-to-day break fix work, move add change work, stuff like that, report to me. And then in the last year, I've been organizing a 24/7 knock, which we went live with a couple weeks ago. That felt pretty good to get kind of in place. Senior engineers don't get as many calls after working a full day, so that's what I've been doing lately.
24/7 knock. That's a dream for a lot of guys. Man. All right. Well, cool. So if when I met you back at the Indianapolis show, you said how many ports do you manage?
Yeah, so it's 144,000 network ports and approximately 90,000 telephone numbers across 40,000-ish phones. Big network for sure. No lack of challenges or things going on. Always
one or two more devices than the number of possible VLANs.
Right.
And then me, I'm out here in Oregon, Illinois, causing trouble, making packets flow, and running the shows. So before we get into our conversation topic today, I'd like to say welcome to. We have two new Patreon supporters. Oh my gosh, what did he do? Raggle Faggle, I believe, is the one name, and then the other guy is Evan. But Raggle Fraggle is Robert. Oh, and I'm gonna butcher his name. Chacon, probably. Yeah, probably Chacon. I invited him. We'll be doing a podcast with him because he does. He is a lead developer for LibreQOS and some other stuff. So really excited to see him participating in the Little Brothers Slack and getting contributions because he's brilliant. He actually answered a lot of my questions about FQCodal and Cake and kind of the inner workings when I was writing some of my own documentation and trying to understand and implement it in my own network. So really, really intelligent guy. And I'm really looking forward to doing a cast with him. And Evan, he jumped in and has been asking me and a few other guys some good questions. So if you want to, join up on the Patreon. So there's a couple bones. You can join us in the Patreon Slack and ask questions, contribute, support. We've got the Villo, a bunch of reps from there. We've got Mimosa, Preseam. I'm forgetting another company, but we got a bunch of different companies there who have reps who are supporting and participating in the industry and trying to make the world a better place, and answering questions about their own stuff. Oh, Unimis as well. Unimis. So Thomas Kernack, but that's kind of an easy one. Also, for supporting the podcast, just going to go through. The Brothers WISP is brought to you by Sonar, a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP billing and operation support system. Learn more at Sonar.Software. They've been supporting the cast since forever, as well as towercoverage.com. Tower Coverage is your RF propagation system to empower your network. Real-time data metrics enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base, and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today at towercoverage.com. We're also supported by Preseam, is an edge network QoE solution that enables proactive management of the network and subscriber experience to achieve higher customer satisfaction while lowering operational costs and increasing revenue. Preseam is made by Aterlo Networks, whose goal is to enable local and regional ISPs to thrive by solving network problems with products that people love. Launched in 2017, Preseam has helped more than 400 ISPs in the U.S. and around the world deliver better internet to their subscribers. And then we also have our most recent sponsor, Villo. We just did a podcast with them, highlighting their products and such, and recording. And their blurb is a complete mesh Wi-Fi hardware and remote management solution that empowers WISPs of any size to delight your customers. Reduce your operating costs and grow your business. Designed with input and feedback from the ISP community, Villo is proud to be a trusted partner of over 150 ISPs around the world. And they make the promise to be making changes to that every few months. So that would be nice, to my other sponsors as well. So just as a heads up, guys, be cool. You know, I don't like being a broken record. Now that we're out of the potatoes, let's head to the meat of the matter. Martin, you did a really cool presentation at the Indianapolis show where you talked about the United States internet exchange landscape and kind of how we were really close to breaking a lot of things because back in 2020. Not entirely doom and gloom, but we should, something to be aware of because us as service providers, which honestly you are as well. You probably hook more kids up with their Xbox time than most of the Brothers WISPs combined.
I don't know about that, but there's no lack of that traffic on a healthcare network, believe it or not.
Yeah. So where you want to kind of start off on talking about this and kind of going a little bit more deep than what you had the opportunity to in Indianapolis?
Yeah. So I guess it kind of goes back a couple years ago, before I met Mike. In 2018, I was senior architect of voice for the healthcare organization I'm at now, and it's a big network, as we talked about a few minutes ago. And there's no lack of traffic. There's challenges everywhere you go, and everywhere you look, there's something to work through, right? Mm-hmm. But as the senior voice architect, of course, I've got a lot of things going on. Specifically, a voice network that is not friendly to things like packet loss, jitter, and high latency. The voice applications are typically real-time communication are typically the things that are least tolerant of any of those conditions. So, and at that time, all I'm hearing in the enterprise space is clouds coming, edge compute's coming, and I've got customers that want to do things that maybe my current system doesn't do very well, and I'm going, I'm gonna have to move to cloud, but then I'm competing with all the stream traffic out there and a lot of other things, and it's like, how well is that going to work? And we're eventually going to find out. We haven't found out yet, but I started looking at, how do you handle some of these things, cloud connectivity, things like that. And then, at the end of the day, like we're a filtered ISP. We have a BGP ASN. We have like 4 10 gig internet connections. So my senior network architect has done a good job, making sure that we have that bandwidth to support the business applications. But yet, I'm the voice guy, so I'm nervous. So I start thinking about that, and then it turns out that one of my good friends that I've known for a long time is an owner of a WISP, or a business WISP. He does a fair amount of business connectivity too, and he's co-owner of an internet exchange here in town, and and I knew he had gotten into the IXP business, but it didn't really register to me, and it kind of got me thinking about my early days when he told me what he was doing. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. It goes back. It got me to thinking about my early days in my career. I started as an instructor, actually teaching Cisco networking academy, and then going on to a larger auto retail VAR and teaching that same stuff out there. And I just remember, this is 1999. Some of the technology in use is still layer 2 bridging over 56K. Some of that. So I'm teaching these people that have never really dealt with routed IP, and they don't really, they kind of know what the internet is at that point. But I remember starting some of those classes talking about how, the path through the internet can go this way or that way, and it might come back one way or another, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, it doesn't necessarily work that way. And in that explanation, ultimately, I'm kind of touching on the concept of an IXP, but until my friend started talking about it a bit more, and I didn't realize how internet exchanges had evolved to things much more than just a couple of ISPs talking over infrastructure. And what that really became is, there's a lot of stream content vendors out there that have put solutions out, and I imagine that all that really began with the Comcast Netflix affair, we'll call it, when Comcast said, "Hey, you're too popular, give us money." And I think there were some other things already going on, but some of the larger stream content providers started really developing the cache systems that were, geo IP familiar or aware, and we're able to work with BGP and start making some really good decisions on, hey, deliver that stream from here, it's much closer, yada, yada, yada. So it just, as I started to learn about it, it's like, man, the internet exchange, or a lot of internet exchanges, have really evolved into things much more than just ISPs routing traffic to each other. And as I looked at it as a healthcare, in a healthcare enterprise, I started to think this actually makes a lot of sense for us, because a fair amount of that traffic that we don't consider important for healthcare or providing healthcare is on our network, and we do have to provide it because we have people that are convalescing, and they want to consume their time in bed, typically watching something off of a stream or interacting with a game, looking at Facebook, messaging on Facebook, whatever it may be. And I got curious as to, just how much traffic is out there. And I was pretty astounded at how much traffic was out there. And it's like, man, if I can basically unload a significant percentage of that traffic, I feel a little bit better about putting cloud voice out there. So that's kind of how it all began for me, was just looking at that. And then I got to researching the IXP industry a little bit more as part of that research. And then COVID-19 happened. And I think before COVID-19, I was already starting to see some things that made me think, why did it develop this way? And of course, in all things telecommunications, it followed money to some degree or another. But COVID-19 happened, right? And I was already concerned a little bit about my own traffic. Shocker, right? Network voice engineer is worried about his own traffic, competing with a bunch of other stuff. So COVID-19 happens. We go into lockdown. I spend several weeks enabling thousands of phones to work from home, right? Like many other people did with various technologies. And of course, if you recall, or maybe you were on a Zoom or a WebEx during that time, around 1, 2 in the afternoon, it probably was super choppy in the first couple of days because everybody just flooded to these platforms. I know on every one of those platforms, be it Teams, WebEx, or Zoom, I was on multiple conferences that just, am I watching an old school kung fu movie type experience? So, that got me thinking about the whole concept of how traffic routes in the United States from an internet perspective. And it certainly, by this time, I'm already pretty aware that most of our traffic routes through Chicago, from Indy to Chicago, probably almost all of it. But I started, as that first wave went on and things started to settle down, I continued to kind of research things, and like those experiences early on. There were other things that went on. I think we had a ton of people doing VPN type stuff where the architecture itself isn't ideal, but then you've got some pretty big amounts of data flowing through from people's home computers, and they're like, this is slow and it's horrible, and all that stuff. So and rightfully so, that the internet was not broken, but it was being challenged during those times. And I hadn't really spent a lot of time looking into it, but around May, early May, 1st of May, a guy at Cisco wrote an article, Jonathan Davidson at Cisco wrote an article expanding the internet for the future, supporting first responders and society at large. And I picked up on that and I started reading it, and there was specifically like one line that basically told me that we probably had some engineers at some of the larger carriers kind of freaking out. I'll read the quote to you here. Our service provider customers and partners have been doing a great job to manage the spikes in network traffic and load balance the shift in peak online hours accordingly. They are vital to helping people stay safe and healthy, keeping the family connected, providing them important services, and supporting their jobs, education. I just remember looking at that and I was like, we almost broke the internet. Is what he really is saying there. I'm probably reading the tea leaves, and it goes on into a number of other things. I think
Martin, those pieces that you're talking about there, that's a reflection of what happened in '95 and in the mid '90s or late '90s, as the internet was growing so quickly. And the routers could not keep up with it at the time because they were all software based, and that was where we started going into things like flow based routing, which is really cool, where you can do some fast track the first time a packet comes in. Once that flow is going, and it eventually turned into the world of the ASICs that we have nowadays, where we divorce the data and the management paths from each other. And that's part of the evolution of this world.
Yeah, I can totally see that. You definitely have me there on the timing. I was just looking at Next Computers at 1995, probably on the campus at Indiana University.
I was just
but I could totally see that. Like oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Like my first experience with a router was an AGS Plus, and then some N-base iPlex stuff that actually ran on a 1 1/4 or 1.44 inch floppy or 4-inch floppy, whatever the
I knew them before they were N-base.
Yeah. Okay. So, like that article was just like, it confirmed to me that, the pandemic really definitely put the carriers in a spot where they had to manage traffic at times they were not used to. And to me, that's just code for things were probably a little scarier than people would have liked. And that led me to kind of look at things a little bit deeper. His article ended up going on about traffic growth across the IXPs, IXP traffic from the beginning of the pandemic to March 9th. So that was only like in a 6-week time frame, was about 16%. And the one that really stuck out was Hong Kong, was at 44% increase in traffic. I was like, man, those are some pretty big numbers. Much less you start thinking about the fact that your effective throughput on links is, it really starts to see degradation of around that 90 percentile. So that 16% is actually a little bit bigger than probably people were comfortable with, would be my guess. I've never worked for a carrier, I've never done any of that stuff, but I can only imagine my feelings on that probably would have been
I mean, very much so. I know I always have paid attention to, okay, well, how much is this link being utilized? How much is this link? Because even for your DIA customers, there's going to be some level of, muxing, or combining of their bandwidth with other people's bandwidth. You're going to try and do your best to guarantee them 10 gigabits of throughput, and you're going to try and have 10 gigs or whatever, whatever that DIA connection is through your network to whatever your upstream provider is. But what that article is saying is, well, we didn't actually have 10 gigs at every single point in our network that was available for everyone. And that's basically what's going to happen is, if you don't own it and you're buying service from somebody else, it's not going to be dedicated to you, because unless they've built a wave service for you that you're the only user of it from one point to another point. But as soon as we're trying to talk to all of the internet, there's no dedicated path across the internet between you and somebody else, unless you're the one who's built it.
Well, the big thing that COVID really did was it threw out everybody's oversubscription profiles and the up down ratios. We started changing those things around. People that were concentrating on trying to do big pipes down and didn't care about what was going up are in bad shape now. Because
that was part of the whole WebEx experience stuff. Is a lot of it was they couldn't take the traffic in that was coming out of the home.
I mean, a lot of pieces here are the assumptions that people had when they were building out the networks were turned on end. It wasn't really so much assumption of what the network could do. It was more an assumption, that you took on because of financial constraints. You decided that I'm going to build a network this way because that was the cheaper way, or whatever the engineering constraint was that people decided to do. Because there were plenty of people that have networks that were more than happy to run symmetrical services, and end to end on their networks, things were fine. But where do you run into problem? Is the problem is it the end user trying to upload that's an issue, or is it the service that they're trying to use is getting overrun? And or is it a route splay issue where you'd rather be able to hand this stuff off to somebody local at an IXP versus trying to hand it to into a transit provider someplace? So that there were so many issues layered on top of each other with with the COVID pieces.
Yeah. And you're trying to balance all this out. Then what Martin and everyone else is mentioning, like I went from 40-to-1 ratio, 40 megabits per second down for 1 megabits per second upload for my fiber and wireless customers to about 10-to-1. Like that's an insane amount of transition as far as the amount of bandwidth being utilized by a customer, a residential customer, not even the business ones. The business ones, they didn't change all that much because business doesn't change. But like residential, it's always been an insane amount. And so like nowadays I have a 600 meg pipe out to, download pipe from Comcast, and it's like 10 megabits per second at best upload. Like that just breaks the internet when you have such a huge disparity there for connectivity. And when you build your network around a huge disparity in between upload and download, that really does start breaking stuff.
Well, I mean,
the
issues comes back to very early in the network side. When the telecoms in the 1990s were pushing that, broadband to them at that point in time meant 45 meg up and down. It was symmetrical. It was a T3 to everybody's house.
ATM.
Yeah, they promised to build this out. And, if you go back and start looking through things, by 2010, they were supposed to have fiber to every house. And part of the 1996 Telecom Act was being put together so that they made sure that, people said, oh, you need to make sure you have the cash flow to do this. So we've already paid them to do the build out to everybody's house. And we did it 25 years ago. But it hasn't happened yet. And in the meantime, everybody took the cheap way to do it and said, hey, here's a limited kind of bandwidth piece. And gee, well, maybe, like the wireless world is a good way to look at it. You only have so many time slots. How many do you associate for up versus down? So, I mean, our consumers were taught what to do, and the networks that were built put us in that position. And I mean, that's getting us away from, this is more going into, gee, what happened during COVID more than, what's an IXP about this, but.
Well, and actually that's kind of the question I have all right. So who would like to describe for our users or our listeners who aren't networking guys who spend their days in and out of data centers? What's an IXP? John?
In my world, an IXP is a nexus of communication. It's a point where multiple networks are easily interconnected cheaply. The whole idea is, if I've got customers on my network that are trying to get to customers on your network, we want to try and trade that traffic in the most cost efficient means possible. There are other, that the majority of networks are their job, they feel that their minimization is to lower the cost so we can get the traffic from my network to your network quickly. And very quickly behind that is the idea of latency. So the faster I can get it off my network and onto yours, then it becomes, a thing that you're going to work with. But there are other people that want to, maximize other pieces. The IXPs, in my mind, are really just that. It's, you think of it as a big switch fabric that anybody that wants to show up can connect to. is one good way to look at it. It should have enough bandwidth that everybody can talk to each other as quickly as possible, getting things in and out, and I can offload traffic, in some place close by because it makes sense because it's going to another network that's nearby. If all of my traffic is going to Netflix, I'm really hoping that Netflix has some type of device local and connected to the IX, because otherwise, being part of the IX doesn't really buy me a lot. Unless, you have to go look at the traffic. You have to have an idea of where you're talking to and what you're doing.
So, Martin, would you make any changes to that description of an IX?
No, I think he's nailed it on the head. I guess maybe from the enterprise standpoint, I look at it a little differently. And truth of the matter is not a lot of enterprise organizations outside of maybe enterprises that are hardcore technology companies participate in the internet exchange, but there's a lot of good use cases for some of those industries. Healthcare is definitely an industry that should be looking at a more internet exchange-based architecture, and some of the centers around the consolidation of healthcare organizations. So, healthcare organizations that are kind of regionalizing themselves and acquiring a lot of healthcare facilities, especially 24/7 hospital facilities, acute care facilities, have some really good reasons to join an exchange. And it really comes down to economy of scale, for one. And then I think number two is, of course, exchanges are typically rooted in data center. And there's, from an enterprise architecture, network architecture standpoint, there's real value in anchoring a portion of your network in a data center, because you're close to connectivity, not just internet connectivity, but carrier connectivity, et cetera. Probably one of the other things that really got me into this subject was also about the same time I was thinking about all that traffic and how it would impact voice. We were told to move from an on-prem data center to an off-prem data center, and that was a 5-year project, because that building was about 125 years old, and there was stuff that nobody knew was in there, that kind of stuff. So I just remember thinking, man, if you have the ability to strategize your money to control some of your real estate, that's a really nice thing from a network engineering standpoint. And when you can put it close to connectivity, critical connectivity and useful connectivity, it can really pay dividends.
You can save money on the transport. You can save money on the time it takes to get a new circuit in place. All of those pieces are great.
Yeah. Well, and if the exchange is big enough, you can, if you can just buy your transit right off the exchange and things like that. And so many engineers in the enterprise space, they do not even know that. They don't get it. Nobody in the vendor space talks about IXP when it comes to enterprise businesses, because
they probably don't know either.
Yeah.
No, they don't know. They don't.
It's a cheat
code. A lot
code
of them don't.
for network. It's a cheat code for network operators in a lot of regards. I mean, you can connect. So one cool thing. So in 2020 during COVID, my experience of dealing with the insanity of Zoom calls and such was my main upstream provider. And this is one reason why I was able to get off of this company, because I was able to show that for Zoom calls, Zoom and Google and Microsoft all have presences in Denver. I'm an hour outside of Denver. It's about 20 milliseconds for me to get to Denver. A little bit less, 10, something like that. Just because of the weird path it has to take back to Denver. So I shouldn't have very high latencies to any of these voice conference services. But I kept getting complaints from customers who were having issues with voice. And admittedly, I'm running a wireless internet service provider at the time. I have to use TDMA that means I am having to add 20 to 30 milliseconds of latency onto their connection just to get that last mile. And so every single millisecond the rest of the time on my network, I care about, because I'm already adding a lot of latency to their connections. And so what I found out is that one of my upstream providers that half my network was going through a lot of the time was sending the traffic to Zoom all the way up from Denver, Colorado, all the way over to Minnesota, then down to Texas. And so I'm going across the country the long way and adding another 40 to 60 milliseconds of latency when there's a data center that where my upstream connectivity goes to, that building, Google and Microsoft are both there, and Zoom. Like, they're all three there. And I'm like, why? And I go to my upstream provider. I'm like, why are my customers going all the way over to Austin, Texas? This is ridiculous. They shouldn't be going through X and Y, other upstream provider. Why is this getting? And they're like, oh, we don't have control of that. They're still getting connection. That's, you do ping for this. I'm like, no. I'm doing packet traces. I do packet captures, and then I do packet traces for where this is going. I'm going across the United States. This is ridiculous.
That's when you get to vote with your pocketbook for what transit provider you want to work with.
Yep.
Because if they're already, if they're sitting in the same, if they're not going to offload the data locally, then you need to go find somebody that is, or build it yourself. And the easiest thing is to go build it yourself if you're close enough to one of the data centers. If you can do that, and you have the ability to, you must be this tall, and this tall means you have to have an ASN. If you've got an ASN, you can do all of these things. But, there's a lot of people out there that don't want to go to that level. They just want to go buy from somebody. Mm-hmm. So I have a friend that when he found out I was working with one of the wireless ISPs here in town, he said, well, gee, nobody wants to work with them really, because with that ISP, because they don't have the fastest connections here. And I said, well, that's true, but everything works well, and we keep it up, and we just make things run. And one day he decided to actually try it out, and he said, oh my God, I was 40 milliseconds from my office, and it's only 7 milliseconds from my house now going through you guys. He says, even with a 10 meg link, it is so much better than, the 50 and 100 and 200 meg that I had before. I said, well, it's, the networks are different, and bandwidth, raw bandwidth in megabits per second isn't always, the thing you need to look at. You need to be looking at latency. You need to be looking at uptime. You need all of those pieces. And the more interconnections you have into the network, the more route splay, the more paths you have to go someplace, the more ability you have to flex around a problem. And having an IX there is, if you get an IXP nearby, you should be able to drop a lot of latency down, just because you're handing things off immediately.
So
I was just kind of jumping in a couple of things here. Earlier, Marty was talking about, enterprises, not really looking at IXs, but we are kind of looking at this from a US centric lens. As I understand it, I don't have experience there, but as I understand it, over in Europe, the large exchanges, DKIX, Frankfurt, AMSIX, Amsterdam, Lynx, London, have a much higher percentage of enterprise connections than, Equinix Chicago or, whatever we have here. And so it's sort of been, that's just how the cultures have grown. I'm not sure how the mixes are other countries. No, I mean, obviously it's still gonna be service provider heavy, but it's not as rare over there. And then kind of on the point we were talking about how, both on enterprise and in, Tommy's former upstream, The people are moving closer and closer towards not my problem. As soon as they can pass the buck, the better. And so if it's putting it all up into AWS or Azure or something, and they don't have to touch any of it, then that's the happiest they can be. Problem being is that then they have no idea how it works, no idea how to make it better, and it's usually not going to be that performant. How do those resources get the scale that they need? Not just the cloud operators, but also the other tier 2 type ISPs, is they aggregate. There's not an AWS zone in Indy or in Denver or in Albuquerque because they couldn't cost justify it. And that's where, I think some of what John was alluding to before was, they're chasing other things. Yeah, they're chasing a buck, as in this is the cheapest possible way to run the network. And they're focusing on cost.
What's that creating?
Bad experiences.
Ha ha. It's creating power suck in 8 major internet exchange markets across the country too.
Yeah.
And so they, and it happens all over the place. People just keep going to what's the easiest way to solve this problem. And so, kind of been the champion of not the easiest way to solve the problem. What's the best way to solve the problem?
Well, that's what engineering is all about. What's the constraint you want to minimize on? If for customers, they want it the cheapest possible. So that means that the people that are aggregating a bunch of customers are going to try and run the cheapest network they can, which means that they probably, aggregate everybody from the smaller markets all the way to the bigger markets before they actually start heading towards the internet. So, that's better. That's better for the providers. That's not necessarily better for the consumers.
Oh, yeah. Sure. I remember an ISP that was in New Orleans got a circuit from one of the tier 1s. New Orleans is not a small place. I mean, it's not Chicago or New York, but it's not a small place.
No IXP there.
And A, no IXP, but then B, the tier 1 didn't even have a router. It was just went on, it was layer 1, layer 2 gear, and they weren't the only ones. They bought circuits from multiple larger carriers, and none of them had a router in New Orleans. The first hops were Dallas or Atlanta. So that's that's profit maximization to this extreme. It's
also part of what's contributing to. No. I think because this conversation eventually leads to the digital divide in a significant way. Some of the things I was looking into as I started to look into those articles more. That article I was talking about from Cisco starts to talk about the digital divide, and it really showed some of the holes in the gaps of service between urban and rural areas in the country and out in third world countries and lesser developed nations. One of the things that really became clear to me is in the United States, there's 8 large internet exchange markets that dominate the traffic. And I'll say California as a whole is practically its own market between SoCal and Silicon Valley. And then you've got New York City. And then, of course, when it comes to cloud, everybody wants to get to Ashburn, Seattle, Chicago, Miami, Dallas, and Atlanta. Those 8 markets are much larger than other areas, secondary cities like Indianapolis, like Cleveland, Ohio, like Columbus, Ohio, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Phoenix, Arizona, Denver, Colorado. Like Denver, Colorado, I'm shocked that there's not a larger exchange there. You know, there's a small handful of secondary markets that have a pretty healthy exchange. Minneapolis, Portland, Detroit, Indianapolis, Kansas City, and the state of Ohio actually has made a lot of headway in the last couple of years on internet exchange development. And then you start talking about, you know, Packet Clearinghouse has plenty of research out there that says, hey, internet exchanges breed a lower cost of ownership for all ISPs operating off of them, and also typically your technology industry tends to flourish if you have a healthy exchange. And then stretch that out towards, look at those 8 markets. Where are all the data centers? Where's all the power suck for those data centers? And you really start to see a trend that, like, I mean, you got to get for me to get to Ashburn, I got to go through Chicago and a number of other hops, right? And that's a long way to go to get to a cloud. But granted, there's plenty of cloud in Chicago, but the only other option for Indy would be Atlanta, Georgia. So, and then there now on the enterprise side, especially in healthcare, everything redundant. So where do I have some pretty long distances to traverse to get to places. In short, what I've really kind of gotten to an opinion. People may say I'm crazy. That's okay. It's just my opinion. Is I'd say that there should be a healthy internet exchange in pretty much the 40 largest major cities in the United States if you really want to have a healthy internet across the board, especially as you're trying to get to cloud compute and also edge compute, where you're trying, like a lot of providers are wanting to get as close to the customer as possible. Well, if you don't have exchanges, you're not really getting close to the customer. So that's one of the things that I've kind of gotten to is the industry needs to go that direction, but there's a lot of barriers to it.
Well, in the 90s, that type of thing did happen. All of the large telcos at the time, a lot of where things are going together is because they all were able to work with a single colocation provider who said, we'll put things together and we'll build it for you, the carriers, as opposed to all of these other data people that we're looking for. And then the large tier 1 providers would peer at those points, but they wouldn't peer with anybody else. It was their private interconnection. So part of this issue is how do we, if the load you're trying to move around isn't distributed to begin with, does the IX help you? Or is it just another tool in the belt?
It takes time for it to help you, I think, more than anything. And at least from what I can see in the way some of the smaller exchanges in secondary markets have picked up steam is the smaller ISPs have to bond together and exchange, and then they can take those ASN traffic statistics and say, content streamer X, we'd like you to come. We've got a decent amount of traffic. It's cheaper for you. It's better for our community, and that tends to be the way momentum really builds. And I think it's in the best interest of all the secondary cities to promote the smaller ISPs to work together, because they can generate enough. And then if you can do that, then maybe you can get some of the more regional ISPs on as well. I think we've seen some progress in the Ohio area on that front, and then I think Indy's getting pretty close to that as well.
You all may be shocked, but some number of years ago, I trolled level 3 quite heavily. This was in the heart of the, Netflix hearing problems. And there were multiple stages to that. At one point, Netflix was being served from a variety of, standard commercial CDNs, one of them being Level 3's CDN. And they were posting that, they had several blog posts and then many, articles in major news publications and whatnot about, how Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, so on were, not cooperating. And just talk about, those guys are breaking the internet with their, lack of peering, and, they're not going to exchange traffic reasonably, and all these things. All the things we're talking about how, we should want to be treating our data. Level 3 was complaining about all the others, large, last mile providers. And I don't want to say everyone, but many of the Level 3 blog posts, I was commenting. Anytime they tweeted something, I was responding. I was saying, hey, you have a CDN in Indianapolis. I know it is located inside of this particular building. We have fiber right here. We have an exchange in the next building over. Hey, guess what? If you join our exchange, that is one more, kick to those guys, and that there's somewhere else for your data to go. And of course, they never interacted with anything that I had done. There was never a response, never anything. Yeah, but it was just like, put your money where your mouth is. You kept talking about, peer, but you're only interested in peering with the, 6 companies that you currently have congested ports with. You don't care about peering with anybody else.
If they peered with other people, then that would screw up their traffic ratios with the people they were trying to put pressure on. There's a whole world of, the whole world of peering. Go read Dr. Peering's stuff. It's just, 20 years old worth of that thing.
Well, and so
sure. It is
really quick.
Could
we explain peering a little bit? So, like, most guys
Sure.
are going to be buying DIA, and so you're going to have a default route that you put on, which is going to be the other IP in the /30 you buy from your upstream provider. So, like, let's try and explain a little bit of what peering looks like.
Well, you kind of have I'm not beyond the IX side. The evolution of most people's networks are, hey, I have a network, I have an internet provider, and I shove everything to them. And then maybe the next step they go to is, hey, I could get more than one internet provider and I could have some redundancy, and it gets a little more complex and you have to do some other things. You have to learn how to advertise your network to people and how to listen to advertisements from other people. But that's kind of the next step. The next step is, hey, I want to have more than one way out. And then the IX kind of steps in as it's a way to interconnect multiple networks very quickly. It's a fabric. In the old days, it used to be ATM, and you would end up with virtual connections that went from, with this one connection, you have virtual connections to every other person, a participant on that network. Nowadays, it's usually an Ethernet port. Everybody just gets an IP address, and we just, we're going to be able to talk across this Ethernet piece, something a lot more familiar to what most people are doing. But it's really just a small refining bit on, hey, I'm going to connect to more than one network. And if you have an IXP nearby, you can connect to multiple networks very quickly and very easily. And most of the IXs give you an abstraction that allow you to make one connection to the IXP and be able to participate with the majority of people that are there.
Yeah, and so you can talk to anyone that's there. You can talk to Microsoft. You could talk to Google. You could talk to your next door neighbor. So like for me at my old job, we had fiber running between our network and the network to the south of us. And we actually just shared BGP connections across. They gave us full routes, we gave them full routes. And so, they sent traffic to us if it was faster, and we sent traffic to them. So it was a really fun network. But like, there was a measurable, it wasn't a lot, but it was 5 to 10 megabits per second out of 4 gigabits of traffic that was going in between our networks. Like, source my IPs, destination their IPs.
Yep.
Source their IPs, destination mine. All that traffic was traffic I wasn't having to pay Cogent, Hurricane Electric, GTT, Telia, any of these other guys who are charging me multiple thousands of dollars for traffic, or Zayo for transport down to Denver to come back all the way back out to me. Like, I'm not having to pay anybody. I've already built all this infrastructure. Like, it's basically and the other big positive that we haven't really talked about internet exchanges is it's cheap, like insanely cheap to get a port in a lot of internet exchanges. Like, down in Denver, it was like $200 a month for a 10 gig port or something like that, is what I recall. I haven't looked at it, but like, Mike, how much is it to get onto the IX?
Well, so for the IX that we are on, I think they're $500 for a 10 gig. The IX that I'm working with Marty's brothers on, I think we're about $700 for 10 gig, which is still cheaper than transit, although just barely at this point. But the quality difference is vast. I was going to make a comment about, so it's not, we've kind of touched on it, so there's bilateral peering, level 3 peers with Verizon, but they don't peer through an internet exchange. They have, 100 gig or 400 gig links that just connect the two of them all over the place. And, they just exchange their routes to each other. But then but then at their scale, they've got how many terabits of data they need to move between 2 points. They at their scale, there's so much data that they would probably dwarf any IX total traffic, to have Telia and NTT peering, they've got to have several terabits between them. But on an internet exchange, it's just part of the internet. It's not all of it. This morning, I had taken a screenshot, not realizing that the podcast today was about IXs, although it came in helpful, for the fiber company that Tommy and I are working with. We've got, on one of the IXs, we're getting about 300,000 routes at that time over the IX. Compared that to Cogent had 884,000. So we were getting about a third of the available prefixes on the internet were available through the internet exchange that was cheaper. And, of those, some of them are directly on the route servers. That's kind of what John was hinting at earlier. There's a router that, you can peer with that just kind of repeats everybody else's routes to you, that you've learned from that. Some companies don't participate in those. Just looking at the list that we've got up here, Microsoft doesn't participate in those. There's a couple others here that don't participate in those. So you'll have to negotiate with them directly. You don't have to spend any more money. You don't have to buy any other things. You don't have to do any other physical connections. It's the same infrastructure. It's just, if they want to connect with you, they'll establish a direct BGP peer with you.
See, now you just hit something good there, is the overloading of the word peering there. every BGP connection is a peer, but we also use the word peering for trading traffic between networks that, typically you kind of think of it as free connections, free traffic once this connection is in place. You
That's
have
the actual exchange of traffic.
Yeah.
And at the exchange, you can do those things. And, so as your network gets more complicated from just hand everything to one person to, oh my God, now we're going to actually listen to advertisements from them. The advertisements are coming across a BGP connection, and then we are going to push that traffic out to the person that says I can get there. Typically, that's a transit connect. That's what we're going to call transit, where we're paying people to take the traffic. But there are peering connections where we can drop off the traffic to people, and it's typically thought of as being free. But they're not going to offer to take all the traffic. They're only going to offer to take the traffic that's on their network. So that's the difference between somebody you're paying transit to versus somebody you're peering with. And these are the types of things that we can go through 15 or 20 hour and a half long episodes like this and be talking about these and still have, nicks and crannies that we haven't explored well enough to get everything across to everybody. So I just hope that people don't get too disappointed in what this was supposed to be and what it has wandered into, because I think it's been important stuff here, but I don't think it was where we planned based on the notes I see here.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be going into a lot of other. There's definitely room for another cast to talk about. Where do we move from here? Like, what are the other opportunities, locations, and talking about how do we build internet exchanges. Some of that is just getting a connection to your neighbor service providers. Have a good relationship with your neighbors, because it's kind of a good idea, and you can share stuff. Me and my neighbor to the south, we were willing to carry each other's we're offering transit basically to each other, and they were fine with that, we were fine with that, we did it. But maybe you don't want to do that for everyone you connect to, but it's definitely worth it to build connectivity in between your network and networks nearby you, because then traffic stays local and you're able to save yourself, money down the road and improve your customer's experience in ways that are really difficult to measure, really, because you don't know how often these things are going to be better, but they just, instead of a, really long bad voice connection in between, some kid and their grandma and grandma's roof, it's a lot better experience overall, because there's a direct connection between you two. So there is definitely some really cool improvements and ways that we can talk about and improve customer experience, because really that's all we're here for, is improving customer experience. If we aren't improving that, then you don't have a job. Once you set up the routes and you set up the redundancies, there isn't really a job for a network engineer moving forward in a lot of different ways. So keep that in mind. Like, your job is to make people's lives better by providing better connectivity. So we're actually kind of starting to hit towards the hour mark, and we're definitely a half hour after the mark that I made initially for people. So and Martin, you definitely have a lot more different conversation topics that I would love to go over. What would you say would be like the big point that you want to leave with, and then we'll maybe talk about use cases and stuff like that moving forward?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely a big conversation. I think we probably touched on a lot of
we kind of did
the larger points, but I think some of the things that we haven't touched on are kind of why haven't IXPs become more prevalent throughout the United States? To Mike's point, Europe, it's a more common thing, especially at in the enterprise space. And I think that probably in and of itself is a conversation to some degree. You know, I think there's some barriers of entry for IXPs. You know, I think there's definitely a disconnect between the enterprise technology community, enterprise infrastructure technology community, and the awareness of IXPs and what they can and can't do, things like that. But I mean, I think we did hit on a lot of the big stuff, but I think you could also get into digital divide. You know, like I think on a number of episodes of the Brothers WISP, there's been conversation around RDOF, right? And I'm not an expert in that subject, but as I understand it, it's a lot to do with handing out money to improve broadband in rural areas, especially, right? If I've somewhat expressed that correctly, hopefully. Yeah, I don't know if anybody that decided that money was important decided that the IXP component was important as part of that.
And it's such a obscure thing. Like, honestly, I was a moderately experienced network person with, you know, basics in running a small business internet services and such 6 years ago, but I couldn't have told you what an internet exchange was. I'd have said a data center was where an internet exchange was, and they have them. But yeah, and you're like, John, how many businesses have you interacted with that were technology oriented and might have known what an internet exchange and the benefits of that would be?
There aren't a lot. The depth of knowledge of most people is basically what our commercial scene has become. It's, hey, let's get a giant network. Let's aggregate as many people as we can onto it. These are ours. These are our eyeballs, or these are our content pieces. And now how do we meter this out and make the most money off it? Well, you don't make the most money off it by putting a whole bunch of programmable gear out in odd places and offload your traffic there. And then when there's a problem, you have to have an engineer that's dealing with it. So there's a big trade-off between how do you engineer a network with lots and lots of peerings at IXs that needs, you know, look at Hurricane Electric. Hurricane Electric will basically sit down at any IXP and connect to you at any. They're happy to, but how many outages do they have daily? How many
daily, hourly?
Hourly. How many people do they have that are there full time whose only job is to sit down and figure out whether this is a short duration outage, or should we reconfigure the equipment, or, you know, do we want to shut down the peering because we don't want things bouncing? How are you willing to put forth the effort to have that amount of network engineering built into your company? Or do you want to just sit back and say, you know what, I got 8 places around the US. If anybody wants to get to me, they can come here. And I don't have to have as many network engineers. I can, you know, I'm doing the same type of work, but there's trade-offs in that world. So, you know, when you start talking about the digital divide, you know, I think the market takes care of a lot of that if some of the underlying initial costs can be found a way to, you know, to be purchased, or to be paid for. And the more mom and pop ISPs that you have in a region that are, you know, that are serving things rather than megalith, you know, giant operators that are taking care of everybody, you know, you want as many of these small operators as possible and get them together at the IXs, along with the networks that those people most need to get to. Be it, you know, maybe you start by convincing the city to put their, you know, to not only Are they buying from an upstream transit provider? Maybe they need to connect to the local IX as well, so that any of the local ISPs have really fast connections into the city's infrastructure. And then all of the big guys, they're kind of stuck because now, everybody wants to get to the city. If I'm on, the local cable provider, I'm suddenly having to go from, Albuquerque to Denver is the fastest way through here. But if I went across the street to this local guy that we kind of, laugh at sometimes, it's 2 milliseconds because everything's done downtown. So how many people actually understand the networks well enough to know what type of interconnections those are, required to do that type of thing, or that even care? All they know
All
is
good questions.
And that's common to have that lack of knowledge, even in mid-size operators, multi-state networks. You still have, people running those things that don't understand IXs, don't understand peering. I had a guy, why do I need you? I have multiple 100 gig connections for my transits. Well, maybe you wouldn't need multiple 100 gig transit. I mean, if you had me, like, do you even understand what you're talking about? No, you don't. I didn't say that, but
yeah, you're trying to make a sale here, but like that's really is some portion of the conversation is like every millisecond. And so let's say you have 1 gig of transit. Every millisecond that your traffic is on that gig, that's a meg worth of traffic right there. Effectively, 1,000 divided by 1,000. Like if you can cut out milliseconds, you're adding, and with the magic of how TCP windowing works, you're exponentially increasing the amount of traffic that can cross your network faster. So it's not just we're not just adding more lanes to the road. We're actually increasing the speed at which the vehicles can drive, can enter and exit the interstate. So, there's huge benefits to reducing latency for your customer's experience. And we're kind of been dancing around that. And, not only, so another benefit that the like network operators trick is people will peer with the local internet exchange, and there'll be Hurricane Electric, there'll be Cogent or somebody else there, and they'll buy transit across the internet exchange for whatever they're doing, and then they also have the internet exchange, so anything local stays local, and anything that goes out to the internet goes across the exact same port. So you're only buying one cross connect, so a couple $100 a month there. Then you're spending a couple $100 a month for the internet exchange port, whatever you're paying for transit, and however much it costs for you to get to the data center. So those are those 4 costs there. They're expensive, but they're cheaper than having to buy multiple, having Zayo build out to you, having, somebody else build out to you, multiple different upstream providers, and then you have to, pay them for all that work as well. So, there's lots and lots of little benefits here.
So have we whetted the appetites of the audience we're trying to get to?
I hope so.
In telling them that, hey, there's these things that exist and we've talked about. Think about all the things we've talked about today. We've talked about, peerings from the standpoint of, between networks and how money flows versus peerings that are BGP connections versus physical connections that are going into an IX or going to a transit provider. I mean, these are all things that every single one of them could take an hour or more, and we could just sit here and play with.
For sure.
And I think I would like to see some feedback from the rest of the brothers and see what are they looking for, what do they want to know more about on with this stuff, because I think we're kind of beating a horse here at this point.
Definitely.
Where are we going to go?
Much so. Yeah. So I definitely like feedback, like where would be, and maybe, some of the guys, I know there's guys in some of these markets that, Martin, you're talking about here, Dallas, Atlanta, Portland. I know we have guys in Portland, and such, Kansas, Ohio. If we could talk to people and, what does it look like to, maybe that's the next conversation is, what does it look like to start an internet exchange provider? How do we make these things better and start connecting together and start building these things together? Because, one guy, okay, yeah, you need 20,000 users before you can go to Netflix and say, yeah, I have a gig of traffic to you every night. Give me a connection. Whereas, okay, maybe 4 or 5 guys are able to get together and say, and make that conversation happen with Netflix and say, hey, we have an aggregate of traffic here, or, whatever you want to try doing.
I think that's definitely one of the best ways to get it started. That's what I've seen has been successful in smaller areas. Seems like a lot of the WISPs, if they typically don't compete against each other for the same, footprint, and they generally all have to get to the same place to actually get to the internet upstream. So they've, in the areas I've seen it be successful, those businesses have been the ones that have driven that success. Also, to John, I'd love to talk about the '96 Telecom Act someday. That's a whole nother topic.
I don't know that I know enough about it, and at the other times I worry I know a bit too much
About it, right?
We don't want to depress people too much. We want to make people feel happy. Looking back like that. Well, okay. So we definitely have some conversation topics to move forward with. We're going to be revisiting this. Unlike active Ethernet versus GPON, we are going to be coming back to this because this is a topic I am very much. I have my heart on active E versus GPON as well, and I will get people back together for that. But this is something that I feel really, really is important, and I will definitely be. Well, I think we're going to be revisiting this back in November, as long as everybody's got some time, and we can talk a little bit more about, starting internet exchanges. What does that look like? What options are there out there for people? Areas that we're, to look at, and like some other ways that internet exchanges can really develop the internet as decentralizing, making the edge compute more more available, decentralizing just the overall internet in a lot of different ways, and some other stuff. So, moving forward, I definitely will be talking about that, but, I think if we've hit and beat this horse pretty hard, any last topics that you guys are wanting to just mention really quick, John?
Not the only thing I was thinking was that as much as we've wandered through here, it's actually good for these to get touched on over and over again from several different places, because a lot of them are new concepts for folks. There's a lot of folks that have been pushing packets out there, and it's only as you're working with them more that you realize how much you don't know and how much you have to learn. And, you were talking about TCP windowing there. The first time somebody runs into a bandwidth delay product and they actually have to go through there and say, well, why does this look like it's only got, 2 meg across it? And it's like, no, it really has more than that. It's just, you've got all your data in flight. And people that haven't ever heard this are wondering what we're talking about right now, but they'll run into it one day, and then they'll have heard bits of it here, and they'll go drag and pull at that string. And that's what these types of ones that wander like this are really good for. You get to touch on a bunch of stuff and people get to hear something new, and then a bunch of people are screaming in the background, why? No, it's not the way it works. We want to do it this way. And they're probably right. But
in many ridiculous, wonderful ways. Yes. All right. Well, Mike, any little thoughts that you wanted to throw out there really quick?
Nope.
All right, Mike.
Mike, speechless?
Mike speaks to this. That never happens. He never doesn't have a thought. He was distracted. There's something else capturing his attention right now. Well, we'll give him a few seconds to think about that and reconsider his life choices. Martin, what last thoughts were you wanting to give out for people?
Three last thoughts, I suppose. As going back to the exchange thing, I think enterprise has to get more involved a little bit. That will only help the exchanges growing. I noticed on your list of subjects you have Thousand Eyes out there. Peering DB is your friend if you're using Thousand Eyes. Now I think there's a couple of others that are popping up in that space as well that you might look into if you're going to talk about that tool set, Kintic, and then another one that actually is really cool I've just learned about is something that goes on a virtual desktop called Control Up. Can give you some interesting information, and for like a VDI device that runs on it runs on a shim, Linux shim on a virtual device. So that's kind of interesting. And then somebody was talking about TCP windowing. If you don't have a subject up there yet, it'd probably be 10 years from now before Quick is a reality as the replacement of TCP. But that's probably a fun conversation for
changing the transports.
Yeah.
You mentioned Kintic. I was part of the network field day for service providers. It was a week or two ago, and Kintic did presentations there, and it's a bunch of impressive stuff, which I would expect coming from something that Avi Freeman is running.
Yeah, I've seen the Thousand Eyes product in detail because of our Cisco infrastructure and the way they've structured some of the licensing of that. And it's a cool tool. Kintic looks, from what I can tell, I've only seen very briefly, but it looks very similar, which to me is very cool because it's all about path visualization and better understanding of where things are going and how things are performing against a series of tests. So if Kintic is similar to that, that's pretty neat. And when you have that information and you start looking at peering DB and where upstream things are going, you can stretch out the use of those tools to help you better understand what your connections are doing, not just through your immediate carrier, but through their upstream and stuff. So
if we start talking about traffic characterization tools, we're going to be here another hour and a half.
Yeah, I'm exploring that right now. So that's something I've been into a lot lately. So that caught my eye. So those were the three things I was like, those are two topics you might want to look at in the future. You obviously got Thousand Eyes and then Quick. I think it's going to be a big subject for everybody in the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's definitely
how quickly
going to
will they move on it?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a nightmare in some people's lives and a blessing for many others. But I suspect Quick is going to be the one.
Sounds super scary.
It's going to terrify so many people. It's going to be like, no, we totally need this because we need to get off TCP. And TCP is amazing. It's wonderful. It's cool. But yeah.
Just change the congestion algorithms. Anyway, that's another hour.
All right. So
second and beckon.
Yeah. So let's start wrapping this up. John, if people out on the internet want to get a hold of you because they think for some reason that they need to talk to you and tell you how they're right and you were wrong in some way, how should they get a hold of you?
If I am wrong, please send me email at john@osmon.net. I'm going to try and play with Twitter a little more. My handle there is at John Osmon, JOHNOSMON. And of course, the Brothers WISP. Get on the Slack there. There's always lots of people there talking. If you talk to me there, I'll probably talk back. That's probably enough.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, people out there who, if you think John's wrong, you're probably wrong. But go for it. Good luck.
No. I am still going to live the rest of my life trying to channel the bad idea fairy for my friend Bill, who is no longer with us.
What is the bad idea fairy?
You have to go do some research and go look at Bill Manning, who used to work with ISI in California, and he was dubbed the bad idea fairy by John Pastel many years ago. And after working with Bill and many different things, you found out he was a bad idea fairy. He would just pop up and tell you anything. Why don't we try this? Why don't we try this? Why don't we try this? And you sat there, you go, Bill, but we can't possibly. Wait, yeah, we could do that. Bill, that's a great idea. But you don't know how many ideas we had to go through to find these things. But since we lost Bill a couple of years ago, I'm trying very hard to get as many people as I can to join the Bad Idea Fairy Club.
Okay, well, I will go look it up. I will put a link for people at the end of the cast for this. Check that out. Mike, if people on the internet want to get a hold of you, I'm guessing that you should just get a hold of me, really.
No, go ahead and well, yes, because by that join the Brothers WISP Slack at patreon.com/the Brothers WISP, and Tommy will get you in there, and you can ask your question and someone else will answer it, because as Tommy is not well aware, I am a very busy person.
He doesn't lie. My job nowadays is to make it so that he is less busy, is as explained to me by my boss. So, Martin, if people were to want to get out there on the internet and look you up and say, Martin, you're brilliant, please help me out or answer my questions, or I just want to get a hold of you and tell you that you are an amazing, beautiful human being, how can they look you up?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. Really, I'm out there, not hard to find. Nobody will say I'm brilliant, probably. I wouldn't hope so. God, I don't want that title.
I will say, though, that you have an amazing yellow suit. It apparently is a photo issue, but on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
you have a pretty cool yellow suit that you wear. So yeah, look him up, shoot him a message, tell him thank you for being a proponent for making the world a better place, because pushing for internet exchange participation is going to help make the world a better place. And I very much believe in that. I am a proponent of it. And I really, really respect you for coming out and being pushing for this in a lot of different ways. So me, on the other hand, there's a bazillion different ways to reach me out on the internet. lostcreek.tech, Tommy at lostcreek.tech. You can get a hold of me at thebrotherswisp@gmail.com if you have Brothers WISP related content that you want to talk about. If you want to get a hold of me on the Brothers WISP Slack, I am constantly on there. I'm constantly helping guys. I was just actually the reason I was actually thinking about TCP windowing is I was just helping a guy with what looked to be a TCP windowing issue. Didn't turn out to be, just turned out to be bad connectivity, but you know, it's always a consideration, always an issue. So feel free to reach out to me in any way you like. I love making the industry a better place, and that's my goal. So if you guys also people, John was just mentioning reaching out to Brothers WISP and saying, hey, how, let us know about internet exchange. If there's topics that you guys think would be really important for internet exchange or internet service providers in general, small guys, I would love to hear that, because I'm in the industry, but I only have my little view of the industry. And so if you think that there's something really big and important that you would like us to do better, presenting on, talking about, reach out to me. I would love to be told that I am wrong, because most of the time I am. So
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, well, just don't tell Mike that I'm wrong, because that's where my paycheck comes from. All right, guys, you take care. Have a wonderful evening, and catch you all later. And take care.
Brothers
Thanks,
guys.
Thanks for having us.
On this mothership, wireless networking. We talk about equipment and methodology, so sit back and start learning. Lighting up the tower so people can start searching. Shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen, cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.